of the Novosibirsk diocese chaired by the aforementioned Alexander Novopashin, an article was posted containing the following statements.
I just want to draw attention to one charming circumstance, namely the principle of Ukrainian-like state organization almost completely coincides with the principle of organizing a totalitarian sect or destructive cult. Meanwhile, for people who found themselves in a cult and once swallowed the cultist lie, this lie becomes a norm. Cultists not only lie to themselves and others, but they also stop perceiving any opinion different from the one imposed on them by the cult. Therefore, simply talking, persuading, or proving is a useless and thankless task. We must remember that the war in Ukraine isn't for territories. The war is for souls, and it will continue in one form or another until activities of the cult are stopped.
All this rhetoric is aimed at instilling in the minds of Russians the idea that the current military conflict is not just a war, but a holy war.
It is clear that loving Ukraine, the Lord is now punishing it. And I'll repeat once again, in order to understand what is happening, you need to understand why the Lord is punishing Ukraine. Why exactly Ukraine? Ukrainians now hate Russians because Russians are merely God's tool. It's like a belt with which a father punishes his child. It's a holy war. It's a war for what we believe in. So I wouldn't be surprised if calls are voiced in churches and mosques.
The rhetoric of a holy war is necessary for the state to justify its aggressive actions, in order to make people believe that their country and they themselves are fulfilling some sacred duty. The purpose of these narratives is to convince the public that a war leading to the destruction of the victim state, the deaths of countless people, and the destabilization of the entire democratic world is acceptable and even necessary. Most importantly, this global anti-cultism seeks to divert citizens' attention from how their own country, which initiated this war, is turning into a totalitarian state.
In Ukraine, the disease is so advanced that it's no longer possible to cure it with any persuasion, negotiations, or anything like that. Only surgery is possible there. So the only response to those Nazi speeches may be the Solntsepek weapon. It should all be burned down, absolutely. Someone may tell me, oh, that's not a Christian way. It is quite Christian. It's just the ethics for those people. They position themselves as pagans, excuse me. So let them get what pagans should. Not the New Testament ethics is applicable there, but the Old Testament ethics, that of Elijah the prophet who himself cut the throats of 300 servants of Balaam. With these ones, we should do the same. Destroy them without any doubt. Just the Old Testament ethics, and they actually understand this language only. Be this vehicle sanctified. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Andre and I took holy water with us. I told all the brothers to lay out the machine guns, and we sanctified all the weapons. That is, we performed the rite of consecration. I drew a cross on my machine gun so that nobody would confuse that it's my cross, the priest's cross. It is my weapon, my sword.
Моя мама 18-го похоронила Берлера из этой войны.
Be these weapons, blessed and sanctified by sprinkled holy water.
Волчанська нема.
final chord, which indicates the ultimate goal of a number of such rhetoric, is the statement of another Ratzer's leader, Archpriest Alexander Novopashin, who called Ukrainians cannibals.
For me, they are all cannibals. I called them so because I saw them like that. These inhumans spill human blood, the blood of children and women, our blood. They devour people's lives and feed on suffering. So who are they? Cannibals. And all those who committed terrorist attacks on our land, whom I listed earlier and whom I didn't name, are cannibals. It is useless to put cannibals in a cage. They'll still remain cannibals, even if you keep them there all their lives. Therefore, cannibals must be destroyed.
And these are the direct words of the leaders of Ratzers, Fekris, and their accomplices, which manifest xenophobia, incite interethnic and interreligious hatred, and encourage the deprivation of life based on national and religious identity. Just as the Nazis, under Hitler's regime, declared the Jewish nation to be non-humans with the support of anti-cultists of that era, today's modern anti-cultists label Ukrainians as a cult, in fact, calling for the destruction of an entire nation, which tantamount to genocide. This is not a coincidence, but a deliberate action.
What we are seeing now is a war, primarily a spiritual war because the Antichrist is attacking the Holy Rus, the Orthodox Christianity. I'd like to teach you to load cartridges correctly, so that the cartridges hit the target, precisely destroy the enemy, and not fly aimlessly in the air. Thus, Holy Fathers teach us this way. When you take a bullet, you load it, and say the following words: Holy Mother of God, save us. Holy Father Nicholas, pray to God for us. Holy Mother of God, save us. Holy Father Nicholas, pray to God for us. Holy Mother of God, save us. Holy Father Nicholas, pray to God for us. Tsar Nicholas II, pray to God for us.
What does the Bible say? You shall not kill.
Do not load a Grad rocket without prayer. For each of these, as you load it, say, Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then, whoosh, boom.
Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said to your ancestors, you shall not kill, and whoever kills will be liable to judgment."
The Moscow Theological Seminary is fighting against NATO. Christ is risen.
Jesus said, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another."
If a person dies when fulfilling this duty, then he, undoubtedly, commits an act equivalent to sacrifice. He sacrifices himself for others. Therefore, we believe that this sacrifice washes away all the sins that this person has committed.
After everything you have seen, tell me, how should the public perceive these people? Representatives of Russia's front religion and their faithful anti-cultist proponents? Who are they in essence? When even at the highest level, the leadership of this organization, calling for hatred, violence, and killing, violates God's commandments just as the Nazis once did. When using the name of God, as the Nazis did in their time, they break Christ's commandments, justify sadism, and call for the destruction of peaceful, innocent people. Can this organization be called religious, let alone Christian? Can we consider them followers of Christ? Answer this now. Who is their God? And whom do they truly serve? You have just seen a small part of what is actually happening, and this is only the beginning. In labeling certain groups and individuals as cults and cultists, the ideological center of terrorist anti-cult gangs did not limit itself to specific organizations, citizens of their own country, and Ukrainian citizens whom they believe need to be destroyed. The anti-cultist narratives have long extended beyond Ukraine. Today, they have already labeled the United States, all of Europe, the entire Western democratic world as cults and have declared them to be Satanists.
In order for the world to live in God's way and not in a satanic way, since they've already built a big satanic village with and without us, where there is one starry striped boss who teaches everyone to live in a satanic way. The Ukrainian political regime is certainly terroristic, extremist, and misanthropic. It is Nazi. The Z sign denotes a world where there is no place for Nazism and Satanism. Ukraine is rapidly rolling downhill, according to the plans prepared by Western and American experts. The special operation on denazification is carried out not just to destroy the Hydra in its lair. We defend the whole Russian world. We defend our civilization. We defend Russia from this evil, from the anti-system. Because if we don't do that, this infection might spread very widely, like a cancerous tumor. There are no societies that have developed 100% immunity against it. We can see that in the West.
The complete denial of a human, faith, and traditional values. The suppression of freedom takes on the characteristics of an inverse religion, outright Satanism.
And the war is not yet lost. It is very important that our country, which relies on its centuries-old spiritual and cultural tradition, having formed its own code of moral values, be capable in some sense also of leading this resistance. I will say an incredible word now, against the Antichrist. Today, I believe that I am acting in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator. By defending myself against the Jew, I am fighting for the work of the Lord. Adolf Hitler, 1925. Mein Kampf.
As you can see, the public actions of anti-cult organizations' representatives lead to tragic events that occur sometime after their information injections. The rhetoric of anti-cult organizations' representatives, besides being filled with manipulative techniques, contains numerous hidden meanings. Anti-cultists do not simply make public statements. They serve as the mouthpiece for the enemy of the democratic world, who openly announces its plans through them. Additionally, their statements exert a covert influence on authorities, providing them with directives for action. In announcing their future plans, the hidden orchestrators of the global anti-cult network have already designated the entire democratic world as their next target. And notably, it is the anti-cultists, as heralds of this covert force, who dictate the rhetoric that is later adopted by Russia's top leadership, including President Putin, who embodies authority for millions of Russian citizens. To understand what the hidden enemy has already prepared for each of you, listen carefully to what this person, echoed by President Putin, has to say.
But if the question, when will all this end, is asked of me as a priest, then my answer is never. Once Ukrainian Nazism is dealt with, another aggressor country will emerge through which the USA will begin to threaten Russia. So the civilizational war is inevitable.
As you heard, he explicitly said that a war for civilization is unavoidable. Do you know why he said that? He said it because he knew that both America and Europe would soon be mired in civil war. He said it because he is already chilling champagne to celebrate his victory. And this was said by a seemingly inconspicuous person, but he is one of the leaders of anti-cult organizations that are part of global anti-cultism, and he is echoed by President Putin himself. Now, here, any intelligent person would ask, who truly holds power in Russia?
Я не хочу, чтобы я умирала. Хочу, чтобы быстрее это все закончилось.
Chapter 5. Abode of Anti-Cultism.
I am sure you have already noticed that a Russian connection is constantly present behind all the crimes of anti-cult organizations, the organizers of the international anti-cult terrorist movement, the perpetrators of terrorist acts, and the ideological inspirers of mass genocide in several countries, all trace their roots back to Russia. The activities of this enemy are always directly connected with representatives of Russia. Why is this happening? Because the real enemy of America and the free world is the Fourth Reich, this global anti-cultism which originates from Russia. It is precisely there that the representatives of global anti-cultism establish their deep state and develop their strategy. It is from there that their commands are issued to other countries for all branches, including anti-cult organizations. It's important to understand that anti-cult organizations worldwide are merely one of the tools through which global anti-cultism achieves its goals. Organizations like Ratzers, Fekris, and anti-cultists in America are just mouthpieces of anti-cultism, pawns on the chessboard that it manipulates. Anti-cultism will not protect them if there is a threat of it being exposed. In order to deflect the blow from itself, it will easily sacrifice them all and discard them like a lizard dropping its tail to escape. In Russia, the country that has become the stronghold of anti-cultism, anti-cult organizations have already triumphed and are destabilizing it by manipulating the minds of millions of citizens. You may wonder, if anti-cultism originates from Russia, why are they destabilizing their own country? The thing is that they don't consider it their country. They hate both Russia and the Russian people just as much as they hate America and the American people. I think you're already convinced of how cruel their methods of manipulating people are, and now I will give you another example. This enemy has set a goal to revive Nazism and to destroy democracy by any means possible. In order to achieve this, they have established a state within a state in Russia that has already gained immense power. Global anti-cultism is cynical and ruthless, and for the revival of Nazism, it has chosen the very country which suffered the greatest human losses defending itself and the whole world from the Third Reich. The most frightening aspect of this situation is that Russian citizens, people who lost someone in every family while defending their homeland from Nazism during World War II, people for whom the very word Nazism is the most terrifying, people who sincerely believe that such a thing will never happen again in their country because they won't allow it, without even realizing it, are now helping to build the Fourth Reich with their own hands. Russia is just a convenient testing ground for the anti-cultists, where they refine all their methods before using them in other countries to take control of the entire world. Anti-cultism and anti-cult organizations hold immense power in this state. They have managed to alter the constitution to suit their needs, took over government authorities, and made Orthodox Christianity their titular religion. Anti-cultism is behind Putin, manipulating him for a very long time. From time to time, representatives of anti-cultism even publicly remind Putin, who is really in charge of the country, and warn him about the consequences if he doesn't follow their directives. One of the numerous examples is Alexander Novopashin's commentary on Putin's election program back in 2012.
Excerpt from Alexander Novopashin's commentary on President Putin's election program.
Whatever the case, we still have to vote based on what politicians declare in their programs. Not all of them speak about morality and spirituality today. Therefore, it is heartening to hear this from Putin, especially after he wished in his New Year's address that the dragon would bring something to us.
By the way, the coming year is the year of the dragon, according to the Eastern calendar. I was actually born in the year of the dragon. As a rule, these have always been fortunate times for us. I hope this time, too, the dragon will bring luck, well-being, and prosperity to every Russian family, to all our citizens.
That really shocked me back then. If a man wears a cross, How can he appeal to some fictional beast instead of the creator and wish its help for his people? Moreover, what do Chinese superstitions have to do with our history, traditions, and culture? Why is this being imposed on us? So, God willing, Putin's words about traditional spirituality will be followed by actions, and there will no longer be concessions to foreign phenomena like rats, dragons, pigs, and other superstitions. I want the campaign words to be sincere, and I want the politician to be consistent in implementing them. Otherwise, he will have no respect either in contemporary society among his fellow citizens or from future generations. Memory will remain, and I think its quality is something that no sane person should be indifferent to. Our church sings eternal memory. I hope this matters to Putin as well.
An ordinary person who knows nothing about anti-cultism might not see anything special in these words. However, you now possess the knowledge and facts about the goals and methods of anti-cultism. Therefore, I am sure you understand that this was a direct order to Putin, as well as a declaration of the consequences he would face for disobedience. If we translate Novopashin's words into plain language, his message to Putin would sound roughly like this. If you don't do what we want, we will ensure that the people neither respect you nor regard you as their president, and we will erase memories about you forever. Do you think Putin heard this? Of course. He did, because Novopashin is merely a mouthpiece delivering a warning from the force that is standing behind him, and Putin understood this perfectly well. He heard it and drew his conclusions.
Today, Vladimir Putin stated that Russia needs to improve legislation on controlling the activities of totalitarian sects. This issue was raised by representatives from the Samara region, along with Governor Nikolai Merkushkin, who came to the president to discuss the region's problems.
They proposed creating a database of such organizations and making the list accessible to all regions.
As for totalitarian activity trends, they certainly represent an unequivocal threat to our state, our society, and our people. That's not just a hunt for the souls, it's a hunt for property. Ultimately, it all boils down to a hunt for the property and souls of these people. I agree with you that government authorities, both at the federal and regional levels, must consider refining the legal framework. Working in this direction and implementing these regulatory documents in practice.
Let me remind you that the term totalitarian sect and the definition of what may be considered a totalitarian sect, that is, a destructive cult, was actually introduced by anti-cultists.
It so happened that in Russia, I was actually the first to deal with this new phenomenon, and accordingly, I was the first to use the term totalitarian sect. Although it happened totally by chance that I was the first to use it, it was obviously on everyone's tongue, or on the tongues of many people at least, because everyone else immediately started using it.
This term isn't defined legally, and its use violates the presumption of innocence. Now think carefully. What? The use of the term totalitarian sect or destructive cult at the official level by the president of a country signifies. With his statement, Putin essentially violated the presumption of innocence, legitimized persecution, and supported stigmatization of millions of innocent people. Moreover, this statement became a signal to law enforcement agencies and security services that they can repress any citizens whom anti-cultists identify as members of a totalitarian sect or destructive cult. All of this happened merely because Putin began to echo the anti-cultist rhetoric after hearing Novopashin's warning. Thus, a single statement by Putin significantly expanded the already immense power of the representatives of anti-cultism in Russia, increased their ability to influence the minds of citizens, and ultimately exacerbated people's sufferings. Some people wonder why Russian citizens do not realize they are being manipulated. However, imagine how difficult it is to live under constant threat and psychological pressure while your consciousness is bombarded with contradictory narratives. People who had tasted a little bit of freedom after the USSR totalitarianism now live under relentless informational and psychological terrorist attacks, in permanent fear for their own lives and the lives of their loved ones. They live in a country where expressing an opinion that seems wrong to that terrorist entity can result in criminal charges against any citizen and their family. In this territory, laws and human rights have long been disregarded. The citizens of Russia are the most affected by this secret entity. Just as anti-cultism has its own state within the state, in the same way they have their own grouping within Orthodox Christianity, which by its actions poisons the very essence of this religion. Having infiltrated Orthodoxy, they use it to fight other religions and associations of people under the directive of anti-cultism. Thus, they have made Orthodoxy their titular religion and got even more power into their hands, which they use to influence the consciousness of Russian citizens and subordinate them to their will. Ratsers has become the main tool for that secret entity to conduct its criminal activities and manipulate public consciousness. It is easier to influence believers since the topic of God is sacred and valuable to them. Sermons and lectures by church representatives contain destructive imprints that are beneficial to that entity and bypass people's critical thinking, penetrating directly into subconsciousness.
Death in the war is better than any other deaths. It's the best of all deaths. I'll tell you that people usually die like pigs, choking on vomit. They eat, drink, get drunk, fall under tables, throw up, and choke on their own vomit.
Their manipulation of people's minds can easily be traced if you carefully listen to their narratives. A recent extremist article by a Russian archpriest serves as a striking example of such an informational act of terrorism.
Excerpt from a lecture by Ratsier's representative Protoyerius Vyacheslav Pushkaryov, titled "Peacemaking and Theological Dialogue with Non-Orthodoxes No Longer Makes Sense."
We, Orthodox Christians, always stand for peace among nations and opinions. We are the true peacemakers, as is the Russian civilization we have created. However, we are experienced peacemakers with a 1,000-year experience. This experience has taught us that not all means are acceptable and not all people are suitable for achieving our goals. This means that we should not rely on government officials or the people who live outside our church. We pin our hopes only on the body of Christ and the Holy Spirit, the Comforter who dwells in it until the end of time. We are the only true statesmen, not in the state, but within ourselves, from the fullness of our heart. We are free from nationalism or partisanship, but we propagate the chosenness of the Russian Orthodox spirit, which alone is state-forming, and we defend it to death. Therefore, in order to maintain peace, we do not need preliminary negotiations with pseudo-clergymen and heretics about the smell of their and our socks, and we do not need their instructions on how to live, because we've had all the answers for a long time, and they are already in practical application. It wasn't us who split from them, but they split from us. They are not the church, but only we are, and the gates of hell have not prevailed against us, and according to Christ's prophecy, will not prevail. Activities in the so-called interfaith dialogue represent an attempt to appease the state, deceive the true Orthodox believers, and create an illusion of peacemaking for non-believers, to prolong the agony of their stay in the world. That's a business which has nothing to do with the divine act of peacemaking. Those among us who don't understand this and indulge pseudo-clergymen only inflate their self-esteem and prolong their convulsions, harming us and themselves at that.
This article is a clear example of an informational terrorist act. It is structured according to a special manipulative scheme, so as to instill the desired narratives in the minds of those who read or hear it. In the article, the Protoyerius first tells believers that Orthodox Christians are peacemakers and always stand for equality and peace among nations and opinions. However, he then abruptly says the opposite. He claims that Russian Orthodoxy is chosen by God, and believers must defend it to death. Finally, he asserts that it is the only true church, and that interfaith dialogue and any negotiations with representatives of other faiths are meaningless because they merely prolong the convulsions of other denominations. Please note that he uses the word convulsions, and earlier also the word agony, implying that other denominations will perish anyway. This method of presenting information is a special manipulative technique used by anti-cultists to impose their desired narratives on society. How does it work? When a person hears statements that contradict and exclude each other, that causes a disruption in his consciousness. At the moment of disruption, the main message is communicated, which penetrates directly into the person's subconsciousness. This information becomes a command that the listener will remember and follow as a guide for action. In case of the aforesaid appeal, the command that a person will remember is the Protoiarius's final message. That dialogue and any negotiations with dissenters are meaningless because they are already having convulsions and doomed to death. Manipulating people's minds in this way, anti-cultists can instill any narrative they want and make them do anything they want. Just like the Nazis, anti-cult organizations use the rhetoric of chosenness and superiority of some people over others. For example, Ratzer's representatives claim that believers in Russian Orthodox Christianity are chosen by God.
We believe in the one holy apostolic church, which is the same church that Christ himself founded. It is the only church that has fully preserved Christian life, Christian tradition, and Christian teaching. And there is only one way to unite: if all the rest join orthodoxy. We have to remember that cults are always fake. Cults are always a sham. They falsify the original. They alter the original. But the thing is that if there is a fake, hence there must be an original. All of us should remember that there is the original and how we should study it.
They impose an idea of their own infallibility and manipulate a notion that cults are dangerous. However, according to official statistics, representatives of the so-called cults rarely even commit administrative offenses. Meanwhile, it is not publicly mentioned that 76% of prisoners in Russia who serve time in jail for severe crimes and felonies are Orthodox Christians. Not only do anti-cultists exalt orthodoxy and call for the eradication of dissent, but they also wage a full-scale war against a global religion, against Islam. This is happening despite the official stance of the Orthodox Church in Russia, which is peaceful towards Islam. In the case of Russia, inciting intolerance towards Muslims is particularly dangerous for the country and destabilizes society because more than 20 million Muslims live there. At a time when true representatives of Orthodox Christianity, on the contrary, try to smooth over disagreements and to find reconciliation, anti-cultists methodically, deliberately, and cynically stir up hatred among millions of people in the country. Like the Nazis in their time, anti-cultists systematically convince people that they have the right to stigmatize and then destroy dissenters. After such sermons and lectures, a believer leaves with an instilled sense of superiority and his own righteousness. This creates a perfect foundation for the terrible offenses people later commit under the influence of anti-cultists. As a result of such informational terrorist acts, hatred is cultivated in the minds of millions. This hatred pushes them first to approve of, and then to commit acts of terrorism and genocide.
You will lose everything. This is not your country. You are demons. There will be an Orthodox church here, and we don't need either mosques or synagogues here.
On the one hand, anti-cultists incite Orthodox Christian believers to be intolerant and hateful towards Muslims, while on the other hand, they increasingly oppress Muslims, allowing themselves to insult their faith. All of this generates tension in society, which the anti-cultists need, tension that builds up to the point where a single spark is enough to ignite a conflict between Orthodox Christians and Muslims. This spark turned out to be the physical terrorist attack at Crocus City Hall.
находимся на концерте в Крокус-Сити. Здесь происходит какая-то стрельба, куча народу бежит, все орут, кто-то стреляет здесь. Какие-то люди стреляют. Подожгли зал. Зал горит. Подожгли нас. Нас подожгли. Нет, там тупик. Там тупик. Там тупик. Вниз.
Yes, physical acts of terrorism are another terrifying tool of anti-cultism for enslaving the consciousness of society. Anti-cultists orchestrate physical terrorist acts to ensure their own total domination in the country and to gain full control over top leaders. The recent horrific terrorist act in Russia is an example of that.
The bleeding wound. 145 people died and more than 550 injured.
The investigation must be carried out in a highly professional and objective manner, without any political bias. We know that the crime was committed by the hands of radical Islamists.
All the detainees were citizens of Tajikistan, or ethnic Tajiks. Since these people are Muslims, it can be said that an undeclared war against Islam has begun.
Tough raids on migrants started in Russia. Riot police knock down doors and take bunches of workers to police stations. Several more Tajiks have been arrested during investigation of the terrorist attack case.
There is always someone who benefits from acts of terrorism of such a scale, and the sole beneficiary of this particular attack is anti-cult organizations, specifically the anti-cultism which used this act of terror to achieve the three of its own crucial objectives. Objective number 1, strengthening the position of orthodoxy as the titular religion. With the terrorist attack on March 22, 2024, anti-cult organizations literally brought Islam to its knees, significantly weakening a religious competitor on their territory. This way, they have further strengthened the dominant position of Orthodox Christianity in the country and divided society to the utmost. Obviously, this attack was aimed against Muslims. Immediately after the act of terrorism, thousands of migrants belonging to this religion, not just citizens of Tajikistan, were expelled from Russia. What do anti-cult organizations get from that? They have instantly and for long got rid of dozens of thousands of freedom-loving people who at any moment could demand compliance with their rights, thereby threatening anti-cultist total power. They have expelled a huge number of migrants who worked in Russia and benefited its economy. As for the Muslims who stay in Russia, they have experienced and keep experiencing inhumane treatment.
Human rights advocates from various organizations report widespread violations of law and abuses of power by law enforcement agencies. Tong Jahoni organization reports that during the first 2 weeks after the terrorist attack, over 8,500 migrants sought legal assistance. They complained about being unfairly fired from their jobs, about biased inspections and even attacks. Lawyers say that people report being subjected to torture. They are kept outside in cold weather, not let into buildings, and go without food for days. They are only allowed to drink water from a tap in the bathroom, which they can access once a day. Human rights defender Valentina Chupik, who specializes in migrant issues, shared the following.
Right now, I'm in touch with the guys, citizens of Uzbekistan, who worked in Balashika. They worked legally. Rosgvardia and police officers burst into their dormitory, beat them all, put them on the floor, and then took them to the police station. 78 people were detained. People were robbed of all their money and forced to make transfers to a bank card. But the saddest thing in this story is that in the dormitory, they were beaten with a metal reinforcement rod. One of them had his eye knocked out. They just tore it out of the socket, while the other guy had one arm broken in 3 places with that metal rod. We receive dozens of such messages every day. Courts behave absolutely disgracefully. They just deport everyone. Most often, they deport people without any hearings. It was amazing when on Sunday, in the Meshchansky District Court of Moscow City, about 280 people were brought to the courtyard. After several hours of them standing in the courtyard in the cold, without food, water, and toilet, a female judge appeared in the window and said through the window, "In the name of the Russian Federation, everyone is deported," and she closed the window. That's it.
It has also been reported that citizens of Tajikistan disappeared after their detention. Specifically, a resident of the Voz district told Radio Ozodi that on the afternoon of March 23rd, Moscow police detained his 2 brothers and his son, and there has been no information about their fate since then. They were involved in apartment repairs. My son was the only breadwinner for the family. We only know that they were detained along with several other Tajiks. We don't know where they were taken or what happened to them. There are statements by Russian officials and the so-called law enforcement agencies that incite migrantophobia. For example, a former Russian presidential candidate calls for deportation of migrants for any offenses. A lot of human rights activists claim that xenophobia has long been imposed by the state, which has ultimately caused aggression against Muslims from ordinary citizens. People appeal to the authorities with demands to deport all Tajiks.
They consider our country to be a place from where they can pump out money, so to say. Their attitude towards us is of the same nature. They don't like us. They don't want to live here and improve anything. So why would we need this? You see, if a man has worms in his intestines, which simply keep draining vital energy out of him, he never tolerates that. Does he think, okay, let them live? Let's feed them? No. In this case, we need to take some concrete measures.
Citizens with Eastern appearances are beaten, denied housing, and nationalistic marks with an inscription, "Tajik means terror," are drawn on their homes.
Persecution of Muslims involves the same methods as the Nazis used when persecuting Jews. Markings on houses, dismissals, employment bans, fabricated accusations, physical violence, deportation, and disappearance of people. All of this represent the methods of one of the stages of genocide.
Now get the fuck out of here! Russia is for Russians, Moscow is for Muscovites, Africa is for Negroes, and dump is for those who are from Caucasus.
Yet, the only crime of persecuted Muslims is that representatives of anti-cultism decided to involve Islam in this terrorist attack. As for ordinary citizens, anti-cultists conducted numerous informational terrorist acts in advance in order to generate such a reaction towards Muslims. It's not difficult to trace xenophobic statements about Islam by officials of public authorities, as well as sermons against Muslims by Ratzer's representatives.
The faith preached by the Arabs is basically plagiarism. They have the same characters there. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. There was a desert around. He didn't have much to do. And let's just say he simply lived somewhere on the outskirts of the Christian world. He heard something. Some scraps of the Christian and Judaic teachings reached him. So he made up some kind of opinion for himself, quite an erroneous one. But since he was an inquisitive man, he found out what he could. Unfortunately, let's say, he found out, well, he actually had little chances to find it out.
Not only did Dvorkin call the entire Islam plagiarism, although it's the world religion that includes about 2 billion believers, but he even insulted the Prophet himself. Dvorkin called him a sick fantasist, possessed by demons.
Then Muhammad had some strange visions and revelations. Some people believe he had epileptic seizures, and he was very afraid of that. He believed that he was possessed by evil spirits who forced him to become a sorcerer. Either Muhammad suffered from some kind of illness and had morbid visions, or it was a demonic possession. Or, again, the Byzantine fathers say he was sort of a storyteller who made it all up. And unexpectedly for himself, his relatives believed in that.
This outright slander by Dvorkin against the Prophet Muhammad caused an extremely negative reaction in the Muslim world. Representatives of anti-cultism systematically manipulated people's consciousness so that, at the right moment, citizens would respond with aggression. Informational terrorist acts of anti-cultists poison people's minds with the venom of hatred. As a result of their manipulations, a person doesn't even realize that those destructive images were artificially implanted deep in his subconsciousness, bypassing critical analysis by consciousness. This is a real information bomb that was planted in the minds of citizens in advance and detonated at the right moment, causing a wave of violence against innocent people. As a result of it all, on social media, we now see people massively calling for the closure of mosques and the banning of Islam. This is how they have achieved their first objective, weakening Islam and thereby strengthening the position of orthodoxy as the titular religion. Consequently, anti-cultism has gained even more power. This is how anti-cultism builds its empire of unlimited power and totalitarianism, using the hands of others and paving its bloody path with innocent victims. Objective number 2, intensifying the polarization within the country and destabilizing society. Through the terrorist act, anti-cult representatives achieved another crucial goal, further dividing society. They need maximum polarization within Russia. They need controlled chaos. Because it is precisely under conditions of controlled chaos that they can fully control the ideology of the masses and manipulate the ruling power. Objective number 3, a blow to Putin's authority. In Russia, for many years, there has been a phenomenon called leaderism, where all power in the country is associated with one person. This means that an attack on Putin personally and his discrediting is an attack on the entire ruling power, and it's discrediting in the eyes of millions of people. And as you recall, the ultimate goal of terrorism, which anti-cultism conducts in any form, is to create a sense of helplessness and fear among millions of people in order to destabilize the population as much as possible and strike at the government and the state as a whole. So how was this blow to the authority of the Russian president carried out? Putin often claims that he fights terrorism and guarantees the safety of his citizens.
In this regard, responsible tasks are set before the units that ensure the protection of the constitutional order and fight extremism. Attempts to provoke unrest, interethnic conflicts, violate the rights and freedoms of citizens, use Russophobia and any other ideology of intolerance must be strictly and immediately suppressed.
However, immediately after the election results were announced, a horrific terrorist act occurred the very next day, and it happened in the very heart of the country. The anti-cultists calculated everything precisely. First, Putin was re-elected, a leader in whom the people had absolute trust. Then, the day after the election results were announced, the focused attention of millions of citizens on their leader was abruptly shifted to the terrorist attack unfolding before the entire nation. The entire country watched as defenseless people were gunned down, burned alive, suffocated from smoke, and died while hugging their children, unable to find an escape. The entire country saw a terrifying terrorist act that the leader they elected failed to prevent. Moreover, he did not even visit the scene of the tragedy. As a result, instead of confidence in the government and the elected president, many people began questioning this very president as a guarantor of safety. This was a very serious blow to Putin's authority, aimed at undermining public trust in him on one hand, and on the other, at showing Putin himself, who is really the boss in the country, and how easily he could lose his electorate and public support. The anti-cultists showed him that they could, at any moment, anger the masses and, if necessary, direct that anger against him. They demonstrated that they have enough power to not only destabilize society, but also, if needed, to spark a war between Christianity and Islam, plunging the country into the chaos of civil war.
No one has ever put Russians on their knees, and no one ever will, because we are Russians. God is with us. God is with us.
Moreover, this terrorist act gave the anti-cultists another advantage. They forced Putin to make significant personnel changes in the Russian leadership to put their own people in key positions. Representatives of anti-cultism have already infiltrated all the critical sectors in Russia. Just think about it. All these people are obsessed with their idea of totalitarianism. They are the ones standing behind the president of the country with the largest stockpile of nuclear warheads. In this regard, consider the precarious balance on which the existence of the entire democratic world now rests, as well as your own existence. Strengthening orthodoxy as the titular religion, polarizing society within Russia, putting maximum pressure on Putin, and expanding their power. This is what the anti-cultists achieved with just one terrorist attack. The terrorist attack that occurred in Russia shocked the entire country. Considering the immense power anti-cultism gained through this attack, how this newfound power is already changing Russian and global society, and the terrifying consequences that are yet to unfold, it can be said that this attack in Russia is comparable to the 9/11 attack in our country, and this is no coincidence. The 9/11 attack in our beloved America was also organized and carried out by them, representatives of anti-cultism, as an act of revenge for their past defeats. It is no coincidence that the 9/11 attack took place on the birthday of the creator and leader of this third force, Felix Dzerzhinsky. Our enemy has always attached special significance to dates, symbols, and numbers. It was the representatives of anti-cultism who struck this devastating blow at the heart of our beloved America. They managed to implement this terrorist attack through their connections with Saudi intelligence. It is exactly anti-cultism that is responsible for all the consequences this attack brought to our nation. These consequences continue to affect our society to this day. They say the explosion in the Twin Towers happened long ago. But this terrorist act is not over to this day. Even today, this explosion echoes in our hearts. An explosion that took priceless lives and peace from us. An explosion that dragged us into a terrible 20-year war. An explosion that marked the beginning of division in our once unified society. An explosion that divided American history into before and after. The narratives of civil war that you hear every day today are all echoes of that same explosion. An explosion for which we blamed everyone, except the real beneficiary of this crime, the real enemy of the United States.
The civilizational war.
The real enemy of America. These terrorist attacks in America and Russia share another common feature. Muslims were presented as the perpetrators of these tragedies, leading to intense Islamophobia, not only within these countries but worldwide. For many years, a deliberate image of the Muslim as a terrorist has been created in your minds. You've been led to believe that a Muslim is an uncivilized, uncultured, aggressive, and dangerous person to be feared. To reinforce this image in your consciousness, regular information terror attacks are carried out. For instance, if a Muslim commits any offense, it is immediately broadcast nationwide, even though identical crimes are regularly committed by non-Muslims. However, when it comes to Muslims, the media accompanies such news with additional commentary and reflections on the impossibility of living with Muslims in the same country. I'm sure you have noticed how, in many countries, mass media consistently highlight the differences between Muslims and the civilized world. You may often hear continuous narratives suggesting that peaceful coexistence with them is difficult due to supposedly different values, cultural and religious differences. Think about how often you hear opinions that your country would be better off without Muslims, that you, the local residents, have given them opportunities, while they behave ungratefully. Have you ever wondered why this is happening? Why is such similar rhetoric against Muslims conducted in different countries? All of this is a multi-year information terror attack conducted by global anti-cultism. As a result, relations between large Muslim diasporas and the local population in different countries are becoming increasingly strained. It's like a spring that is constantly being compressed. Let's consider where this might lead. In order to do this, you need to look at the situation in the world, taking into account the knowledge you already have. You know that global anti-cultism aims to establish a unified Fourth Reich. To achieve this, it continually destabilizes democratic countries, eroding laws and people's rights. As you may recall, the next target of the enemy is the division of the United States of America through civil war and the division of Europe. So, let's just assume that the enemy has succeeded in their plans, resulting in a divided United States and a disintegrating Europe. What do you think will happen next? Do you believe Muslims, incited by anti-cultism, will be able to resist the temptation to attack weakened European countries, the same countries that forced them to flee their homelands, the same countries where they've been oppressed for so many years? The question is rhetorical. Now consider this. As soon as the first attack by Muslims occurs, this conflict will immediately escalate beyond the borders of a single country or even a continent. The entire non-Muslim world will instantly come to defend Europe. If war breaks out, it will be a war of the whole world against Muslims. Do you think the parties involved will refrain from using nuclear weapons? And what do you think will be the outcome? I'll give you a hint. Considering the military, technological, and numerical superiority of the non-Muslim world, almost 2 billion Muslims would be wiped off the face of the earth. Let's consider why this might be beneficial for global anti-cultism. First, it would be a convenient way for them to seize vast territories rich in natural resources. Secondly, it would be an ideal opportunity to permanently eliminate a large group of freedom-loving people whom global anti-cultism has failed to break from within and bring under its control. Islam as a religion is particularly difficult for anti-cultism to control because Muslims form a society within a society. They have adhered strictly to the Quran for many years and follow their established traditions. Therefore, it's very hard for anti-cultism to control Islam because Muslims manage to avoid the global introduction of anti-cultism agents into their religion. Consequently, representatives of anti-cultism strive to demonize Muslims to eventually eliminate them, despite the fact that in many countries, Muslims live peacefully and harmoniously with other religions. Representatives of anti-cultism highlight isolated incidents, trying to convince you that all Muslims are subhuman. Anti-cultists instill this belief in you so that, when the time comes, they would be able to destroy the entire Islamic world with your hands. Could this be the very civilizational war we have heard about many times before?
But if the question, when will all this end, is asked of me as a priest, then my answer is never. Once Ukrainian Nazism is dealt with, another aggressor country will emerge through which the USA will begin to threaten Russia. So the civilizational war is inevitable.
Such a move would allow anti-cultism to achieve a state of managed chaos, so excruciating for humanity that people would be willing to accept even the harshest order and would ask for it themselves. Humanity would willingly request to live under the Fourth Reich. The biggest problem is that you do not see the looming threat of global anti-cultism hanging over you. You do not notice how global anti-cultism, this machine of violence and murder, which knows no pity, is relentlessly moving toward its goal, the destruction of America and the free world, and it only gains power along its way. Feeding on people's fear and deaths, we see that it has already broken not only Putin in Russia, but also Macron in France and Scholz in Germany. These countries, entangled in the tentacles of anti-cultism, can no longer call themselves democratic. France and Germany are considered the foundation of Europe, and if America's enemy is not stopped, it will soon consume the rest of European countries as well. And if Europe falls, and the enemy strips people of their rights and establishes totalitarianism there, just as it did in Russia, how long can America, the last bastion of democracy in the world, hold out alone against everyone? The question is rhetorical, given the hatred and speed with which the main enemy of America is advancing towards its goal. Before your eyes, the enemy of the entire free world is committing terror attacks and stripping you of your freedoms. It is killing democracy, one of humanity's